The first scream cut through the frozen air like a blade. Daniel Cole froze mid-step, the morning frost crunching under his boots, and turned toward the sound echoing across his ranch. Then came a knock, sharp, frantic, rattling the old wooden door. He pulled it open, his breath fogging in the cold, and saw a little girl standing there, trembling. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt, her small hands raw from the cold, and her torn orange dress fluttered in the wind. "They hurt my mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Please, she's dying." For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. The sight of that child, barefoot, bruised, her eyes wide with terror, hit him harder than any winter storm ever could. Without asking another question, he grabbed his coat and draped it over her shaking shoulders. "Show me," he said quietly. The girl nodded and turned toward the woods behind his ranch. Her name, he'd learn later, was Lily. Her steps were small but steady, her determination the only thing keeping her from collapsing. They walked in silence, the forest pressing in around them, the air sharp with pine and fear. After nearly half an hour, they reached a clearing where an old shack leaned against the trees like a wounded animal. The door hung crooked, the wind moaning through its cracks. Inside, Daniel heard a soft cough, weak, ragged. He pushed the door open and found a woman lying on a pile of blankets. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, her breathing shallow. "Mama!" Lily rushed to her side, tears spilling over. Daniel knelt down, his rough hand hovering over the woman's arm. She flinched before she even saw him. He could see the bruises, old and new, and he didn't need to ask what had happened. He'd seen it before, too many times. Years ago, his sister had looked just like that, broken, scared, trying to pretend she wasn't in pain. He hadn't been able to save her. That guilt had built walls around him ever since. But this time, he wasn't going to stand by and do nothing. "Hey," he said softly to the woman. "You're safe now. My name's Daniel. I'm going to help you, all right." Her lips parted, and she tried to speak, but the sound came out as a whisper. He lifted her carefully, feeling how light she was, like a breath of air, and carried her out into the morning light. Lily followed close behind, her small hand gripping his sleeve as if afraid he'd disappear too. Back at his cabin, Daniel laid the woman, Mara, he learned, on his own bed. He stoked the fire until the whole room glowed warm and safe. The smell of burning oak filled the air. He cleaned her wounds with careful, steady hands, his brow furrowed in silent concentration. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew what pain looked like and what it needed to heal. As he worked, Lily sat beside her mother, clutching her hand. Every so often, she'd glance up at Daniel with wide, uncertain eyes, as if trying to decide whether to trust him. When Mara finally drifted into sleep, Daniel leaned back in the chair by the fire, exhaustion catching up to him. He looked at the little girl wrapped in his coat and felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel Cole realized the ranch didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Lily never left her mother's side. Her tiny hands clung to Mara's as Daniel worked through the night, changing bandages and whispering quiet words of comfort. When he finally asked who had done this, Lily hesitated. Her voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes glistening with fear and fury. "It was him," she said softly. "The man who said he'd help us after my daddy died. He said he'd take care of us, but he hurt her. Every time he got angry, he hurt her. Last night, he said he was done." Her throat tightened. "He left her in that shack to die." Daniel's hand stilled. A deep, steady anger rose in his chest, cold and sharp, not the kind that fades easily. He'd known cruelty before, but hearing it in Lily's small, broken voice made it feel personal. Still, he forced himself to breathe. Rage wouldn't save Mara. Action would. For 3 long days and nights, Daniel cared for them both. He barely slept, feeding Mara spoonfuls of warm broth from his own kitchen, keeping the fire burning through the bitter cold. He worked his ranch at sunrise, then came back every few hours to check on her, never once letting exhaustion win. When her fever broke, when her bruises started to fade and color returned to her cheeks, Daniel finally let himself believe she might live. During those quiet days, he came to know Lily better. She was cautious at first, like a wild fawn testing new ground, but her eyes softened every time Daniel smiled at her or lifted her onto one of his horses. He'd walk beside her as she rode, steadying the reins with his rough hands while she giggled for the first time in weeks. At night, by the fire, she told him about the nights she'd hidden under the floorboards when the shouting started. How she used to imagine a safe place, one with sunlight, warmth, and no fear. Every word hit Daniel like a hammer, but it also fueled something inside him. He'd failed to protect someone once before. He wasn't about to fail again. When Mara was strong enough to sit up, Daniel made his decision. He rode into town the next morning, the rising sun cutting across the horizon like a promise. His horse thundered down the dirt road, hooves kicking up frost and dust. People stopped to stare when he tied his reins outside the saloon and pushed through the swinging doors. Inside, the man sat laughing with his friends, a bottle in one hand and arrogance in the other. The moment he saw Daniel, the room went still. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't threaten. His voice was low, steady, the kind that made men listen. "You're done hurting them," he said. "You'll never lay a hand on Mara or that little girl again." The man smirked, muttering something cruel, but Daniel didn't blink. When the sheriff stepped forward, Daniel laid out everything. The bruises, the doctor's notes, the statements from neighbors who'd heard the screams. The evidence was clear, undeniable. The sheriff didn't hesitate. The man's laughter died when the cuffs snapped around his wrists. Justice, real and unflinching, had finally come. When Daniel returned home that evening, the light was golden, stretching long across the fields. He found Mara sitting outside the cabin, sunlight brushing her face. Lily was curled beside her, tracing little circles in the dirt. When they saw him, both of them smiled, the kind of smile that holds both gratitude and something deeper. Mara's eyes glistened. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I did." In saving Mara and Lily, he hadn't just protected them. He'd finally healed a wound that had haunted him for years. The guilt he'd carried since losing his sister began to fade, replaced by something softer, stronger. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to change. The silence that had once haunted the wide, empty land was now filled with laughter. Lily raced through the yard chasing chickens, her torn dress replaced with warm new clothes Daniel had bought from town. Mara's strength returned little by little. She cooked simple meals, helped with chores, and filled the cabin with a quiet warmth Daniel hadn't felt in years. Sometimes, when the sun set behind the hills, Daniel would watch them from the porch, Mara humming softly while Lily played with the horses, and realized that the world, broken as it could be, still had the power to heal itself through kindness. And in that moment, surrounded by light and laughter, Daniel Cole finally understood something he'd forgotten long ago. Family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one that finds you when you least expect it.